Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic: what's a subtle sign that someone is a good person but doesn't want to show it? Had a teacher growing up that came across as very strict and standoffish, gave off this air of learn the material or fail. In reality though, he would answer any questions you had, even if it was being repeated, was incredibly patient, and would stay as late as he needed to in order to make sure the students understood the material. If a majority of the class bombed a test, he would address it with the class to understand what went wrong, and would redo the material if needed. Looking at him or just popping by his class, you'd think he'd be a typical hard ass, but in reality he cared immensely about making sure we understood our lessons and were prepared for the next year. I had a math teacher like this in high school. She assigned mountains of homework and was super obnoxious about showing your work for everything. I was always a bit of a challenge for her. I picked up the material super quickly, but unknowingly had undiagnosed AD, so I would immediately lose interest the second I grasped the ideas. And showing work was painful when I could find shortcuts to get the right answers. She eventually wore me down to the point where I did show all of my work and kept me engaged by calling on me to go up to the board and do a difficult problem in front of the class while talking through what I was doing. Looking back, I realized she was calm, infinitely patient and as thorough as the student needed her to be. She could communicate advanced concepts in multiple ways so that every student could grasp a concept in the way that made the most sense to them. After college, I went back and thanked her for being by far the best math teacher I'd ever had. She told me that she had regular visits from prior students like me, and that those visits are what drove her. I never really saw it while her student, but she had a killer wry sense of humor. I inadvertently took up her entire off period and apologized profusely when students started coming in, but she insisted that I stay for a few minutes. She asked if I remembered how to complete the square, which was a method for solving a particular type of polynomials. Yeah, I think so. She wrote the problem on the board and asked me to solve it while explaining all of the steps. I can't express how happy that made me and how proud I was to do it perfectly for her. Bravo, Mr. CFCs. Have you done that since you were last in my class 5 years ago? No. Then tell me, was all of that homework worth it? Yes. Absolutely. I had a teacher like that a few years back. Unfortunately he passed a year after I left the school. RIP Mr. G, thank you for believing in me. I've discovered that often what appears to be indifference is actually an internal struggle of, I am extremely concerned about this but I don't think that it's any of my fucking business or requires my intervention. Whoosh, you just put into words what I haven't been able to for most of my life. Same. I'd be there for anyone who needed me in a heartbeat if I knew they wanted my help, but I'm learning about myself that my parents were walled off and emotionally preoccupied growing up, so I internalized the message that loving others means giving them space and not inflicting myself on them. When I sense people are overwhelmed, I become very worried that having to respond to a text or a phone call from me will be what pushes them over the edge. It seems like a silly thing to worry about, but I've seen so many people tweeting and posting about being overwhelmed by electronic communication since the pandemic began that it's reinforcing my communication anxiety. They say take your time. I always thought of it as a common courtesy, even if I'm not in a hurry. Like if I'm waiting for a Starbucks order and I have nowhere to really be, when someone says it'll be out in a few minutes I just say don't worry, take your time, because I always felt it was the polite thing to say. What most people don't realize is that bit of common courtesy shows that you recognize the other person as a human being whose time and emotions also have value. Many people are so lacking in self-awareness and empathy that they simply do not value other people's time. Thanks for taking the time to care. I really appreciate you. Edit. To add to this, we all have our blind spots and we all have our off days. You are not automatically a monster if you forget to be polite one time. The good news is we can learn our blind spots and grow our whole lives if we just tell ourselves to take our time once in a while. When you're in a group and that one person keeps trying to say something or add to the conversation but they keep getting talked over, then that other person will look at them and say, "Sorry person, I didn't catch what you were trying to say, can you repeat it?" And makes space for the person being ignored unintentionally. That's a real gem. I feel validated by this. I waited tables at a pretty popular New Mexican restaurant when I was in college. There was this one manager, her name was Rosie, and she never smiled. She always looked like she was pissed off at everyone and everything. The entire wait staff and bus staff feared her. When she walked into the kitchen and wanted something, the line would immediately jump to her demands. It was rumored that she was the person to fire any employee when an employee was fired. The only people that didn't seem to be scared of her were the hostesses. They were always talking to her like she was just any other manager or person in the restaurant. She scared the hell out of me for the first year I worked there. I made sure that she never had anything to be upset at with me. One day, I came into work sick as fuck and having just a really bad day. She took me to the side and talked to me for a good half hour. Just asking quizzitos about my day and how school was going. Towards the end of the conversation she said I didn't look good and that if I wanted to, I could take the night off. Rosie was the best fucking person I ever met inside the restaurant industry. From that day on it was my goal to make her laugh. I never did make her laugh. But I got a smile out of her quite a bit after that. She was not just a good person, she was one of the best. But man, you wouldn't know it unless you really took the time to look. She was one of those types of people you know had had a hard time in life and put up a rough exterior. But deep down she was a softy and loving grandmother type. I hope she's happy in her retirement. Cool story to hear, thanks for sharing. I hope she is happy too. This gives me hope with my manager. She is really rude when I ask for help, but she did let me go home the time the stress made me physically sick. When you are having an argument and they actually listen to your point instead of just getting ready to make theirs. When my ex-best friend and I first met, we spent the night at my place watching YouTube videos and showing each other our favorite music. She said that I was the first one to actually shut up and listen to what she wanted to show me instead of talking or mentioning stuff about my next YouTube clip I wanted to show her. Damn, I miss her. What happened? If you don't mind answering, of course. Or when they don't insult you as a person as a comeback to your argument. I despise that this has become so normalized, especially in politics or anybody with an audience. Discretion. I see it is a sign of empathy, most of times, at least. They anticipate that openness may be undesirable for you and so they remain discreet in order to make you more comfortable. Be it regarding some information you shared with them or when helping you out with something, no questions asked. I've found that saying I don't need to know more if you're not comfortable telling me is one of the surest ways to get someone to unload all of it on me. I've completely meant it every time I've said it and also have learned to expect this reaction. I have found this to be true also. I think when you say something like that to someone who's upset it takes the pressure off them a little bit, they can breathe for a minute, and they always launch into it. I think being told hey you can talk or not but I'm here for you shows a person you're going to be a good impartial listener. When someone is actually in trouble / needs help, they will help out, even if it's really subtle or disguised as something else. For instance, there was a kid in my school who had a reputation for not caring about others, doing whatever he wanted, and tried to convince everyone that he pretty much had no emotions. I think he thought it made him seem more tough and hardcore, and although he didn't necessarily do anything bad to anyone, he tried not to seem kind either. Once, one of my friends at school had some sort of emergency where she needed, I think, $30. Most people in class either didn't have $30, which was quite a bit for a kid to bring to school, to loan her, or they just didn't want to give it to her, thinking they would never get it back, and she was panicking. The teachers couldn't help her for some sort of legal reason. I think she wanted to take a taxi to the hospital because something had happened to a family member but was slightly underage, and the teachers had to pretend that they had no idea she was doing this. So, this kid with the reputation collected money from all of his friends, since he didn't have the money himself, under the pretense of another reason. I think it was something like movie tickets or something for that evening. Then, he privately gave it to her, but told her not to tell anyone it was him. I was close friends with her and was actually standing right next to her when he approached us and told us this. She managed to get to the hospital on time, while he paid for the tickets or whatever with his own money once he got home. When she later offered to pay him back, he refused, insisting that he didn't do anything. I think he knew that her family would struggle to pay that back, they were having some financial trouble. I guess it's not extremely subtle in my case since I was standing right there, but that was the first time I began realizing how some people pretended to not be a good person when they actually were. Wow, this is really eerie, because this story is actually almost spot on for something I witnessed in high school. Girl had a family emergency, and needed to buy a bus ticket to travel 2 hours to where the hospital was, and didn't have the money. A friend of mine, who was a notorious apathetic person, came to me and was like, I need to borrow $10, and when I pressed why, he said he was giving it to this girl so she could afford bus fare. I have no idea what a ticket cost then, but he apparently borrowed enough from his friends because she made it, and he denied ever doing anything, and claimed he used the money to buy weed. After we graduated, this friend moved out of his mom's house, lived for 2 years on his own, and then attempted suicide. I hadn't really kept in touch, but I found out through another friend that his mom had been pretty abusive, and to top it off, had taken credit cards out in his name, putting him in massive debt at the age of 20. This was after years of emotional and physical abuse. He's doing great now, married to a great woman, and we casually keep in touch through Facebook and email. Over the decade and a half since his attempted suicide, more and more information has been shared about just what he was going through in high school. I really feel like his little act of kindness in helping that girl was in a way therapeutic for him, a person who needed help and wasn't getting it, to help someone else. Wow, I'm so glad he's doing well now. The boy who I witnessed helping the girl out is also doing well. I think he's in a great program in college studying to become a doctor. Interestingly enough, I think he also had a lot of trouble with his own mother, who put a lot of pressure on him. I hope that still isn't the case now that he's in college, but I really have no idea. That's terrible about the abusive mother, though it's so sad to think that a parent would do that, especially to her own child. If you're casually friends, I wonder if it would be nice to mention how you remember how he helped out that girl. Maybe it would show how these small acts of kindness really make a difference in people's lives.